What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. This week we're going back to the 90s and we're making a Tamagotchi. I'm not sure how many of you remember these things or were even alive back then, but in the late 1990s and early 2000s, these Tamagotchis were extremely popular. I personally never owned one, but my sister did, and I think almost every other kid in school at the time had one. I saw an image of one a few days ago and it brought back a lot of memories, and I thought it would just be a lot of fun and nostalgic to make for this week's video. Now, as you already may know, reference material is important, especially when trying to recreate a real-life object. So I jumped online and found a few reference images, mostly from Google Images and Amazon ads. Now, to my surprise, there's a lot of different variations of these Tamagotchis. I guess they've changed a bit over the years, but this model in particular was the one that I remembered most. And I think it's the original design that they had back in the 90s and early 2000s. So this was my goal, was to make it look like one of these. What's also very important are dimensions, and without knowing the correct sizes, it's really hard to make anything look realistic. And oddly enough, I had a very difficult time finding blueprints or schematics of these Tamagotchis online. So what I decided to do was use a relatively front orthographic image from one of those ads that I found on Amazon, along with some dimensions that I found from a Google search. The dimensions I found online were in inches, so all I had to do was jump into Maya and make sure my scene was set to centimeters, and then I could do a quick Google conversion from inches to centimeters and plug in those numbers. So all I did was plug in those numbers to the scale X, Y, and Z, and that way my cube would be the correct size that Google was telling me these Tamagotchis are in. My idea was to size my reference image to this cube I created, so then hopefully my Tamagotchi would be fairly accurate to its real life size. I could also use the cube later on down the road to help figure out how thick this device is, since I didn't have any orthographic side views to work off of. Now, another really important thing is choosing the correct shape to start off with. After looking at these reference images, you may automatically think of starting off with a sphere to get that main rounded shape. And to be honest, I did as well. But the more I stared at it, the more I thought a sphere wouldn't work. If you look at a default sphere in Maya, the tops and bottoms have a lot of triangles, and in most cases this is totally fine. But if you look at these Tamagotchis, they're basically like squished in spheres, where the tops and the bottoms have the most curvature. Having triangles on those curved edges would probably result in a lot of artifacts and incorrect shading in our mesh, especially since these are made with shiny clear plastic. Any artifacts will easily be picked up in light. So sticking to quads will definitely be the best option. So we need to make a quadded sphere to achieve this, and to do this, I'm going to start off with a cube. Now of course a cube is very blocked out, so we need to smooth it out to make it more round. So I'm going to go up to mesh and then down to smooth to add a smoothing effect and make it more rounded. I'll also have to increase those division levels a bit just to add more polys and make it a bit more rounded. Now if you look at our smoothed out cube, it still has a small cube-like shape to it. It's not perfectly circle. So to fix this, we're going to go up to Deform and then go down to Sculpt to add a sculptor transform onto our mesh. If I view the scene in wireframe, you can see that sculptor transform shape inside of our cube. And all we have to do is select that, and then we can scale it out, and it will stretch out our smooth cube to be a perfect rounded shape, just like what we want. Now what we're left with is a sphere that has only quads, and this will make chopping this thing into two much easier and also help prevent any weird artifacts from showing. At this point, it's just a matter of taking our sphere and now stretching it out to align with our reference photo. Now, of course, there are a lot of details we could have added into our materials to either save on polys or save on time, but if you can, I always find adding those details into geometry is a lot of fun and usually gets you better results. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, like usual, I will go over what I would do differently later on in the video when we go over those UVs. For example, the front buttons I completely forgot about until the very end. I don't even know how I forgot about them, but after UVing everything, I realized I was missing buttons. So I had to quickly boolean out some holes to add them in last minute. And if I were to go back, I would have added those buttons earlier on in the process to get cleaner topology. But like I said, we will go over that later on in the video. Oh yeah, and if you like these videos, please consider subscribing to the channel or check out my Patreon page for exclusive content like working files and 3D models. This whole video will actually be uploaded to my Patreon page in real time, which includes the full UV mapping process along with all the working files like the Substance Painter file and the 3D model. So if you're interested in seeing any of that, you can find it on my Patreon page, which will be linked in the description below. Alright, for now, let's just continue blocking out those main shapes and we can slowly piece together our Tamagotchi. Alright, so here is the Tamagotchi in its finished form. Now everything is basically the exact same as it was in the whole process that you just saw. I just did a few small things, like I changed the rotation of this tiny little clip piece up here at the very top. I just thought viewing the opening at the front of the Tamagotchi would just look better for renders. But honestly, everything else is the exact same. And like I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, I decided to add these 3 buttons at the very end because I just simply forgot about them. I'm not exactly sure even how I forgot about them, since they're a pretty important part of this model. But I honestly did, so to save time, I just quickly booleaned out some holes. And to be honest, this is the one area that I just kind of rushed. As you can see, the topology is not the cleanest in the world. It still works. And a big reason why it works is because it's relatively flat on the front here. If, you know, these holes were on the side where there's more curvature, I would have to pay more attention to artifacts, just because there's a few triangles that are coming out from some of these. But it's pretty straightforward. I just cut out some holes, added some supporting edge loops around. That way when I smoothed it all out, it just helped with the artifacts. Now, of course, if you zoom really close and you look at some specific angles, like here, you can see a little bit of some shading going on, but to be honest, I knew you wouldn't be able to pick that up once we jumped into Substance Painter. And like I said, you could probably get better results if you just added those booleans in earlier in the process rather than after everything was smoothed at the very end. So this is the one area that I just wasn't too happy with, and it's the one thing I would come back and fix if I had to come back and fix something. Now, as for textures, this thing's fairly small, so I thought one texture would be fitting. So if I open up the UV editor and I click on the model, you can see it's all laid out into one texture set. Now, the important thing, of course, was trying not to have too much stretching on this front piece, since we are going to have different graphics and different labels and things spread out, like the actual Tamagotchi label on the top and different prints and stuff. The more stretching we had, the more difficult it would be to have nice textures. So having this front shell fairly laid out correctly really helped with the whole texturing process. And everything else is pretty straightforward. I made sure that all these other shells, like this one that we wanted to have some other words, and this back label piece, this little sticker, those UV shells were fairly straight as well. That way it just made my life easier assigning materials and text to these texture sets. Anyways, that's basically how I set up my Tamagotchi. It's very straightforward, and as you can tell, it's fairly high in polys. You can obviously save lots on polys if you wanted to, especially when it comes to these balls, these little metal balls here. I just use the default sphere that you add in, but you can obviously start with a much lower poly sphere and just save on tons of polys in this piece alone. So there's always important things to keep in mind when you're modeling, is how the model is going to be used. This is just for fun renders, trying to recreate the real life objects, so the more polys in the scene felt fitting. And another big thing I wanted to bring up were the seams on the back. Now, as you can see, I separated this piece. That way I just had some nicer bump and some nice cracks between where they separate the two pieces. But that's one of the main areas I would probably reduce in polys if I had to cut back on all the polys in this scene. You could easily add this bump, this line, into the material in Substance Painter, and you actually don't have to add that in your geometry, which would result in just less polys. And as well as this booleaned out back hole here, as you can see, it's really not even that nice and rounded. I could have done a better job, but this whole back piece I could have just stamped into the material and didn't have to actually extrude it inwards into the geometry. So all these little things can add, save you tons of polys throughout the model. So it's just something to keep in mind. Same with these lines here on the front. I thought it'd just be fun adding those into the geometry, but of course you could get away with adding that into the mesh and just saving on those polys if you have to. Alright, so now we just need to export this Tamagotchi. We can jump over to Substance Painter and we can start our texturing. Jumping over to Substance Painter, we can go ahead and load in our FBX file from Maya. Now, when it came to the textures, everything was fairly straightforward. I just basically found a few different references online, and I just wanted to recreate those looks. Now, originally I was going to recreate this one pink Tamagotchi, this reference of all these little lines, but I realized the more I looked online, there's such a wide variety of different Tamagotchis and different designs that it made me really start thinking about creating more textures. So I just simply created 5 different versions of the same model. So once I created one, I just grouped those textures up and I just simply created another with different designs that I found online. Now, some of the important things was finding the correct alphas. For example, the Tamagotchi label. I just Googled that, turned it into an alpha in Photoshop, and I dragged that in so I can stamp that directly onto my mesh. And as well as all the other small labels, I just found different images on Google Images that I thought were fitting, and I just saved those as either alphas or textures that I could drag in and just stamp them directly onto the mesh. But everything else is basically straightforward. I used all the materials that come with Substance Painter. The new update gave you different fonts, which is extremely helpful, and I'm very, very happy that they added that, so you don't have to actually add different fonts to your own in Photoshop. So I just used that to my advantage by adding some different text on the very back for all of that bump that you saw. Now, like always, I'm sure I'm like a broken record. You guys will hear this in all of my videos, but I always find it's important to just not worry about dialing in the perfect texture right off the bat. I find that can really drag out the whole texturing process, and once you start adding in different materials around the other materials you added in, suddenly everything needs to be changed, and it can just drag everything out. So what I like to do is just start filling in all those empty meshes with some sort of material. I always like the smart materials. They are really great foundations that you can start working off of. In this particular case, I just use fill layers, just plain textures, just to fill in all those empty meshes. And then once those are in place, you can start adding more details like different grunge and different grime and different wear and tear over top, and you can start adjusting colors to however you want them to look. So I find just filling in those meshes and not worrying about getting everything perfect right off the bat can really save you lots of time in the whole texturing process. Once again, if you do want to see this full video in real time, along with access to the working files like the Substance Painter file, it will all be available on my Patreon page, which you can find in the link in the description below. All right, let's just start having some fun with textures and start adding some fun details to this Tamagotchi. And that is everything. That is the whole texturing, 3D modeling, and UV mapping process that I did to create this old Tamagotchi. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's video, and if you did, smash that like button and please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, I want to give a massive thank you to all of my Patreons. You guys are all amazing, and I really can't thank you enough for all of your continuous support. Alright, thanks so much for tuning into this week's video, and I will catch you guys in the next one.